Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar regarding Powerproject BIM. My name is Ben Taunt, and I'm going to be spending the next 30 minutes going into the more advanced features that exist within this software product. So in terms of our agenda today, after our introduction session, I want to recap briefly on some of the subject matter from yesterday's session. That is to say, just to recap on the principles of the Powerproject BIM solution. Before then, quite quickly moving on to the demonstration of the more advanced features that exist within the software product, and hopefully we'll be able to really stretch the capabilities of the tool. I will close off with a discussion on the next steps you want to take as an organization, and there is opportunity for questions at the end as well. So this is part 2 of a 2-part series. So yesterday we covered the basics of 4D scheduling. Why would I want to embrace 4D scheduling, and the core concepts of using the product. So some of today's session, you think we've missed a step, how do we get to there? You may want to watch back the first part of the webinar. All our webinars are recorded, so you can always request a recording of the session, or you can sign up to the future sessions at the events website. Housekeeping, everyone's muted, don't worry about any background noise. If you want to communicate with me, please tap a question into the GoToMeeting control panel. I'll pick those up at the end of the session. You will receive an email this afternoon with a link that will include the recording to today's session as well, and you can share that with colleagues. So let's get on with it. Where did we get to yesterday? We talked about how Powerproject BIM is an extra module for Powerproject, so it's something else that you can activate within your existing Powerproject license that allows you to import a 3D model in the IFC format and show that alongside your Gantt chart, just as that person has done in the top right-hand corner there. There is then a process that we demonstrated yesterday of linking the project activities up to the model, either by using a manual drag and drop, including using sort of square bounding boxes to pick up items, or by using automatic searches to find parts of the model that meet a certain criteria and linking those up automatically. That allows us to simulate the model using a variety of different time scenarios. So for example, using either our planned or our actual dates, comparing that through 3D windows and starting to share that with other users. Yesterday we covered a couple of the easy ways of sharing data, and we're going to do more of that this afternoon as well. So the core principle of Powerproject BIM is to open up the availability of 4D planning to anybody who wants to get involved in scheduling plans in 4D, giving people that 3D context to help them do their job better. But there is a lot more under the bonnet after we've got over the core principles. And this is a bit of a hint of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to bring in multiple models, move them around, bring in site objects like that mobile crane we can see on screen. We're going to look at growth paths and coloring of models as they get simulated, but also looking at the core data that sits within the model, so quantity information and what we can do with that. Then we'll play with some of the visual side of things, so cameras, movement paths, different ways of exporting into video files, etc. So let's get on with it. And I'm going to start today with where we left off yesterday, which is this little university here, or college building, where we've got a fully linked bar chart, where there's an activity in here that links up to everything within the model. But it is worth highlighting that this model itself is actually 3 different files. So we've been given 3 different M&E files, sorry, 3 different IFC files, starting with the structural components, overlaid with the M&E elements, and this is quite a detailed model. It really goes down to each sort of individual light fitting that you can see there, and if I can find some examples of each individual electricity socket is within this model, so that's overlaid on top. And then there's the nice fancy architectural stuff as well. So there are 3 IFC files that have all been combined in Powerproject. Now, some of the more frequent questions we get is what happens if we get a revision of one of these models? So what happens if someone comes along and says, actually, I've changed the design here, or I've changed the parameters. Here's a new model for you. So in the Powerproject BIM configuration window, I can actually look at the properties of these individual files, and I can see that I can manage revisions. I've got a button here called Manage Revision. If I wanted to, I could add in the revised version of that architectural model. If I wanted to, I could open that up. I could give that a tag saying that's the second revision. So I can have more than one version of that IFC file. And if I had done that, I'd actually have that in a drop-down list, so I can toggle between them. So I can actually flip between visualizing the different revisions of those models through using Powerproject BIM. Now, how you brought that model in and linked it to your chart, that will depend on the way in which you link it. The way you link it will impact what happens when you bring in the revised model. So if you have picked up that roof and you've dragged it over and dropped it on the chart, Powerproject links to the GUID of that part component. That's that long code shown up there on the top right hand corner. That is a unique part number for that roof. If your designer gives you back this model and they've taken that roof element and stretched it, the unique code will be the same. So when you bring it into Powerproject, we will still have remembered the link. You won't have to relink it up. If the designer deleted the roof and redrew it a different product entirely, we won't know that GUID because it'll have a new code. So you've got the potential there of having to relink it because of the change. But if you remember yesterday, we did talk about searches and how in a search, rather than doing a link to an individual product, instead you can link to some of the model properties that are shown here, such as the fact it's been tagged as being a roof. So if our search tagged it as being a roof and we linked it up via that, it won't matter if the part has changed because it will still have the same coding information into it, and we will remember that and we will continue our links. But I do want to talk about an issue we sometimes get when we get given multiple models, and that's shown here in this example where I've got my structural model over here on the left, and clearly it doesn't align with the architectural model that's over on the other side of the screen. Now, traditionally, if you had this problem, you'd have to have gone back to your designer and say, something's gone awry with your output. Perhaps I've got different design teams, they've got different coordinate systems, and we sometimes get this confusion that Powerproject sees these things in different parts because the data is basically being exported differently. However, I've now opened up what's called my Model Alignment tab, and I can actually fix this problem within Powerproject. So I can take that structural model and rotate it by 90 degrees. There it goes. And I can also pick it up on the horizontal pane and physically drag it around. Now, at this point, it saves me an awful lot of time where I might otherwise have to go back and have an argument with a design team. I can instead just do a very quick, perhaps a little bit dirty, manual move of those components. And now my two parts overlay each other. So when I run my timeline simulation, we're no longer going to have the conflicts we would have otherwise had because I have fixed the problem in Powerproject rather than having to go back to a design team to get them to change the design. So there go my structural components with the architecture stuff wrapped nicely on top. So that's quite a handy thing that you can do in Powerproject BIM to solve a potential issue. But we can extrapolate on that same principle. If I wanted to put temporary items into my BIM window, let's say I want to drop in a tower crane, I can use a similar functionality. There's actually a tab here called Site Objects that allows me to add in other IFC files. And I've actually got a folder called Site Objects, which Powerproject comes with when you buy Powerproject. These site objects actually are library items that you can utilize. So I can bring in that tower crane, I can make it yellow, I can set its position so I can rotate it around, I can scale it down a bit, and I can move it on the horizontal plane and on the vertical plane so it sits on the surface of the site. So I've brought in that crane and moved it around, and there it is. I could bring in multiple tower cranes, so let's bring in another one. Let's make that one a red tower crane, and let's do something similar with its positioning. Let's put it in the other corner though. Now, why am I bringing in two cranes? What Powerproject can't do is show models moving around in real time. So we can't sort of model logistics paths in the same way as some products can do. But what we can do is bring in these models and link them to activities. So I can have Tower Crane 1 having a task here, which this crane links to, which means that when we get to this task, the crane will appear on screen. Later on in the process, I can have another task that that crane links to, But in this example, rather than the construction task, it's going to be the deconstruction task. So if I look at the models of that activity, I want to say that when I start that activity, the piece of the model it's linked to is going to disappear. So I'm going to have that as a demolition task. And if I was to do that now with my second tower crane in a very similar sort of vein, and link that crane up to both parts, and have that second activity is also as a demolition activity. Now when I run my playback, in theory, if I've done this correct, I should start this project plan with the yellow crane arriving. There it goes. After a period of time, that crane will then disappear, and my second crane, the red crane, will appear. There it goes, and my second crane appears in screen. Now I didn't show it whipping around the corner, but I did have a way of modeling those cranes and saying when do they appear and disappear within my simulation. So I guess you can see there are different ways in which you can control how the visualizations appear. And there is lots of things we can do with our visualizations to change things and improve them and make them more relevant to what we're working on. And if I just quickly go into what's called the perspective mode, and I zoom down and I sit inside my model here, I may have multiple parts of this model, like, for example, this piece of wall here, and different things are going to happen to that wall. At the moment, it's linked to one task, and if I was to run a simulation, you'll just see that wall appearing. But what happens if I want to be able to visually represent when are we going to be putting up the studding, when are we going to be hanging the plasterboard, when are we putting the plastering over it, when are we painting it, when are we doing first fix, second fix, etc., etc. I've actually got that one wall potentially linked to multiple activities. So what I can do in Powerproject is actually use a concept called a simulation profile to say what happens when we're working on that task in Powerproject. So I can have what's called a build color. That means that I can have that asset change color at different points in the simulation. So I can have it pink when it's being installed in the first time. I can have it yellow when it's being plastered. I can have it red when first fix is going in. I can have it green when it's being painted, etc., etc. So I can use these colors to represent what's happening within it. You might also note here, I can change its color based on where it is in the sequence in terms of early and late coloring, on-time coloring. So I can also use colors to show the progress of this project. But I do want to highlight this direction field. And a build direction, as its name implies, will state how it is rendered to screen. So if I had an upwards build direction, rather than this wall simply appearing, it will show as being drawn from the bottom upwards. Likewise with left to right. So I can have a simulation profile in here for the roof, and I want the roof to go from left to right. And if I go to the roofing slab and I find the task here, I can actually assign that as a simulation profile, saying that that task is going to be the roof profile. And when I now run the timeline simulation, that roof will slide from left to right rather than simply appearing on the back of a truck. So those are different ways that we can go about helping Powerproject to show you better visualizations. Now, whilst we're in this, you'll also see that I've opened up some columns that are showing me more information about these products. And quite simply, these are just properties of the model. If I take the example of my pile caps here, and if I just run the simulation profile forward a touch, we'll get to where the pile caps come on board. That didn't help. So when I've got all these pile caps here, Powerproject has found 78 of them. So when I click on that task, all of them get highlighted, and Powerproject has said to me there are 78 pile caps meeting your search criteria. Now, without having to refer to any extra documentation, that means that I know I need to be scheduling in 78 different tile caps, so that when when I'm actually creating that task, I've then got a much better idea of what's going to happen with that because I've got those numbers within it. So I've got all of these extra information about the amount of rebar that are going in, precast beams, etc. Now, if I go back to my example of the roof, in the roof, I've got product areas being shown. So I've got the volume of that roof to help me to know what's happening. Now, yesterday, we also covered splitting. And just to prove that Powerproject isn't making this up, it's calculating these values on the fly. If I click on that roof, you'll see we've got a calculated area and volume number. If I now take the example of splitting that up into lots of different shapes, such as that. Now when I click on each individual square, you'll see the calculated area is lower, obviously 141 square meters. If I start to multiple select them, those area values are increasing. Down here, you'll see we're now at 796. So as I select multiple items, we're adding all of those calculated areas together, thus making life a lot easier for us when we go about visualizing this in the future. Now, these bits of information, you might want to include them in formula, refer back to them when you're using task work to assign resources, and basically making sure that the data that's in your BIM model is helping you to do your job as a model designer, as a model developer. Okay, so that's really handy in terms of creating my plan in the first place. And I've gone to the effort of creating my project plan, but I now want to improve the export. So at the moment, when I hit play, yes, okay, it's a nice demonstration, but currently my camera is in a single static position unless I choose to move it. What I can do with Powerproject is invoke what's called a fly pass to programmatically control my camera position. Now, this simply relies on a number of different data points. Let's call this the webinar fly past. And what I can do is state that I'm going to have a number of different data points that all refer to a task start. And now what I need to do is go and pick the tasks. So at the start of this project plan, this first task here, that's going to relate to this first activity. So I'm going to set task. So when we start this activity, I want my camera position to be zoomed all the way out. So I choose the update viewpoint option. When we get to our second data point, which is going to be a task further on in my demonstration, let's say this one here. So I'm going to set that task. I want my viewpoint to have zoomed all the way in. So we get a different view entirely. And then if I roll further forward and choose a further task and set that task, I want my camera now to be spinning around to the other side, and I can update that viewpoint. So I'm basically combining two things. I'm combining a point in time with a camera position. So when I choose that webinar fly pass and I hit play, I'm now not touching the keyboard and mouse. You see that the camera has followed this nice smooth position where it's zoomed into the model until it hits the second data point that I created. When it gets to that second data point, it starts to spin around to my third data point. And that was the last one I configured, so it stops there. So you've got to do a bit of trial and error to get these into the perfect position for you. But if you choose the example of where you want to be looking into a different room when we're working on different things inside, then clearly these camera fly paths are going to be very efficient in helping you to achieve that. I did also just say yesterday, I'll remind you today, go to webinar compresses my screen. So if I run one of these animations and it looks jerky at your screen, that is because of the compression algorithms of the internet. Powerproject BIM is running nice and smoothly. It's just your visuals of it at this point. But there we get a good example showing me all the cranes are in place and where they're going to go and disappear. If I follow down this menu option, the next one is to create a video. Again, very simplistically, I'm going to export to an AVI file, either just the one model on screen, or if I had the comparison window open as well. Comparison window is now going to track my baseline. When I create the video, I can choose to include the comparison window either on the right-hand side of the window or underneath the window. I can choose different codecs and different resolutions of the video. And I can also add in some text. So I can add some free text on top of it. I can say I want to include the week numbering data. Also want to include sort of like target information, baseline information. And I can also choose to overlay customer logos, client logos, or anything else that I want to put into visualization. And if I hit create, it's going to go away and create that video for me. In true Blue Peter fashion, here's one I prepared earlier. You'll see this is the comparison window on the right-hand side. My logo as it happens down the bottom. You can see the week numbering's been put into the video file. And so at the bottom is the task that we're working on. Now, clearly we're playing spot the difference again in terms of where are we behind in terms of our live dates and our baseline dates. If I'd chosen to include the red and green coloring schemes for early and late, that might have helped a little bit further with that as well. But those are the sorts of videos we can export. If I just pick up another one here, where I've got this library, we're zooming in on the library once it starts playing properly. So we can zoom into a library, we can show the temporary objects going in place. In this case, we've got porta cabins going in. I'm actually doing some removal work here. I'm actually stripping away layers of the screen before then building into the basement layer and working my way up. Here come the temporary cranes. And our visualization the whole way through is going to be mapping out the project plan sequencing that we've got within Powerproject BIM. Now, we do get sometimes criticized saying all our models only show buildings. So I did also want to flip to my nice bridge here. Now here, there's an awful lot going on screen, different positions. If I run this simulation now from the very beginning, you'll see that there's work going on at both the southern and northern end of this bridge. So I've got work being poured down there at the same time as I've got work being poured at the other end. So my visualizations, my fly paths, can help to smooth that camera position around so that I've got pre-configured always the best things to show on screen at the same time. I've also got some growth paths here so we can see those building spans going up and across so that our project is as realistic as it can be within this 4D environment. Now, underneath the Create Video button, we do have a one called Create Flipbook. You may be wondering what a flipbook means. Put simply, it's a series of images captured at a set point in time. So, for example, I want to export a JPEG file representing the first working day of every month. So I want the first Sunday. No, I want the first Monday of the month. Same thing applies. I can add annotations into those pictures if I want. If I was to hit create, it would export a series of picture files representing each milestone, each beginning of each month. Again, here's some examples I prepared earlier. This is of the other example of our library build, but you'll see a whole library item of images. Now, the reason why they're called flipbooks is if I open them up as an individual file and I start to toggle through them, you can see why it's called a flipbook, because I'm effectively flipping through this file on a day-by-day basis. Great if you want to include that into a PowerPoint presentation or such like. You've got this export of images that you can utilize going further forwards. Now, just a few more quick things to pick up on before we finish today. As well as the flipbook, I can choose to save a particular image at any point. But I've also got this option of what's called saving to an O2C file. Now, an O2C file is a highly compressed version of my model. And it's going to take into account where we are in our timeline or window when we choose to export that model. So if I save to an O2C file, this is saying it's my bridge as of the 31st of October, looks things. And that's going to export just this O2C file, taking into account everything that's shown on screen at the moment. So if I go away and find where I saved that, which I think I put onto my desktop, you'll find that the O2C files are there. The bridge as of the 31st of the 10th. It opens up in a third-party browser viewer that you can download for free. And there's versions of this viewer which you can also use on mobile phones, tablets, any sort of web product, for example. They're very, very small files. So that whole compressed IFC, which was the raw IFCs are tens of megabytes, hundreds of megabytes. This O2C file is less than 3 meg, easy enough to put into an email. So I can now provide that to someone on site saying that's what we should look like as a 3D model as of the 10th of October. So again, a nice way of sharing your 4D asset information with other people. And just to reiterate, everything I do on the screen is also taken into account when I hit File Print, because I can have a printout. In my printout, I need to choose a border file. That border file has within it the capability to embed the IFC. So if I just do it on this option, hopefully I've got the right border configured. There we go. The models is now shown alongside my Gantt chart. And that would be included in any printout that I produce. Okay, that was the extent of what I wanted to cover today in terms of the extra capability that exists within Powerproject BIM. Hopefully there we've moved on from the initial getting our hands dirty with it, and we've started to really look at some of the more advanced features that exist in the software, so that you can understand that there's a lot more power in here when it gets to utilizing Powerproject BIM. So if you have any questions for me, now's a good time to tap them into the control panel. In the meantime, I'll just pick up on the fact that you can get a free viewer for Powerproject BIM. That means that everything I showed on screen today, you can distribute to somebody for free in a read-only manner, so they can't make any changes to it, but they can run simulations and look at filtered views, etc., etc. So if this was enough to convince you that Powerproject BIM is a tool you want to utilize, as I said at the very beginning, you can add Powerproject BIM to any existing license of Powerproject. If you're listening to a seminar from within the UK, please do give us a shout directly and we'll be able to help you out in adding this to your licenses. It's just under £700 per Powerproject license, just over 1,000 if you're using it on a concurrent network license basis. If you're listening from outside the UK, then you can contact your local distributor and they'll provide you with costs in your own currency, along with details on things such as the training courses we provide for Powerproject BIM. So there is a one-day training course that covers everything we've covered today, so you can utilize it yourself. And we do offer a free trial. So if you've never used Powerproject before, you can download the free trial from our website and it will automatically include BIM. If you're already an existing user of Powerproject, you contact us directly, we will enable the BIM functionality in your current license remotely without having to have any complications of switching out your current licenses. So just give us a shout if you've already got Powerproject and you want to trial Powerproject BIM. And that's it from today. So thank you very much for your time.